Hello, my name is Rob Schulte, and my favorite thing is making some recap podcasts.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and we get recommendations without using an algorithm. I am still sitting in Cleveland, Ohio, waiting for my friend's evening wedding. And what better way to use the day than doing interviews? And I am really excited to be joined this afternoon with Rob Schulte. He is a podcast producer for Team Coco. He has his own podcasts. And we are also have the Doughboys in common. We met in the Dough Squad, and he has recently produced an audiobook for another guest who you'll get to know through the podcast, Mike Sachs. But today it is all about Rob Schulte. Rob, how are you?
I'm great. Let's talk more about Mike. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm sure that episode will be good. Thanks for having me on. All information accurate, which is great, you know?
Okay, good. Everything I found on your LinkedIn and your website, indeed, still true.
Yeah, thank goodness. You know, I didn't have to. I took down all of the false things before the last job. You know, no, I'm just kidding. It's different to pad your resume these days. You know, you can't do it the same way back when you're handing off hard copies.
No, people can actually do the research.
Yeah, the algorithm, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you currently produce. Now, are you a producer? Are you a sound engineer? There are all these roles in podcasting as they, right? So like I am both the CEO and janitor of my podcast.
Sure. Been there. I know that feeling.
Yeah. So what is your actual role that I should use when I talk about you in the future?
Well, I'm a senior producer at Team Coco, but, you know, the thing is that, like, most times, and this goes across the board on most podcast networks, and, you know, if you have the ability to staff, you have a producer, you have an engineer, and sometimes you even have the person outside of that will mix your episodes, you know, and they're an engineer as well in their own right. But as I'm sure we'll get into when we get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what I've done, like, I've always kind of been like you in that just being a powerhouse from start to finish, being able to make the podcast myself, you know? So when I got hired on there, one of the main questions that, you know, I wasn't, you know, at the table saying, you know, do we want this Rob guy? If I would, I would have been hired a lot earlier. But but apparently, I think I've been told that something that like sealed the deal, if you will, is that they asked me, well, are you able to produce and engineer? And my answer was, that's the only thing I've ever done. Like, right. So, yeah, in my little bubble of Team Coco, I produce and engineer 2 of their podcasts. One that I love the most would be Parks and Recollection.
Yeah.
A recap podcast.
A recap podcast, which we'll get more into.
Yes.
So does that mean when... Okay. So
yeah, we can break it back.
Engineer.
Yeah.
Producing is like the administrative office work, like where you're getting the person, you're doing the calendars, you're making sure the Zoom is set. You're like, it's the
cat wrangling. You know, it's the making sure that, like, everyone has everything they need for the most successful episode, right?
Okay.
And if that means people need, you know, notes made or an outline, that's part of it. If it means I have to say, hey, remember 11 o'clock, we're recording 3 episodes, I do that. Okay. You know, and then while we're doing the podcast itself, I'm making notes, I'm you know, communicating through the chat, or, you know, hopping on mic to be like, actually, let's retake that. Or here's something even more funny that I just found out on Wikipedia, you know. And then the engineer side of it is I just take all of those files and I make them sound as good as humanly possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, the journey of, because this podcast for me was a COVID hobby.
Sure.
Right? Just like everyone.
Oh, yeah.
I got 10 hours a week back from my commute plus all of my social life. And I finally decided to do a podcast. And I released my first 10 episodes. I would do 2 a day, twice a week, just to get the ones that sounded like shit out the door. I was like, I'm okay learning in public, but I don't want to bank these episodes where I thought I had plugged in my mic, but I had not.
Oh yeah. And the other side of especially when you're just starting, I mean, I've been there. I know what you're talking, the extra work that goes into cleaning up audio that really you can throw it in a application that can do the best the application can do, which sometimes is really great. But is your, I totally see how is your focus going to be cleaning up the audio or just remembering to do it right the next time so that we can keep the feed alive,
Yeah. So I was keeping the feed alive, learning as I was going, and just got it. But it is interesting to me how I assume this is what it's like to train as a sommelier. My ear has gotten better. I can hear static that I used to not be able to hear. I still can't use it. I still can't use my tools, but it has been a wild to learn to hear more.
Oh yeah. And the thing for me is that sometimes I like to get involved with the communities of the podcasts that I work on as best I can. And even when I'm in other groups like the Dose Squad or whatever. Now, this actually hasn't happened in the Dose Squad, but in similar groups, sometimes people will reach out with questions or, how would you do this? Is this the right setup? And I think I'm not here to teach anyone, but it's the sort of thing where if you just lock it in to where you just get the recording right and do a pickup if you screw something up or if something sounds weird, nothing is better than good audio. And so many people are well, I just want to be able to put the system together so that I can hit record and then press release into the podcast. And it's well, nothing's going to be perfect from start to finish. You'll at least need to listen to it once more.
Mm-hmm. And then you have to get comfortable with, I was editing a podcast this morning and with a woman who had really long hair and it was hitting her microphone. And I was like, hey, do you have a hair tie?
Yep.
And it's getting over the embarrassment to ask the person on the other side to change something about their setup.
Oh my God. I know.
It's really, and at the beginning I've got some interviews that were practically ruined because I was too embarrassed to keep nitpicking them about where their cord was hitting or whatever it was they were messing with just off camera.
I have a very vivid memory of the last time that happened to me because I had been at Team Coco for only a few months, really. And, you kind of hit the ground running at some of these larger networks. And one of the people who was on one of the interview podcasts I work for was Ron Howard. And
no.
not only is it Ron Howard,
right.
Richie Cunningham, just the nicest guy that can be, but he's also I don't know what exactly the reasoning was, but he was in Europe at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I know he's staying up later to accommodate for this. So I'm at least all right, if anything goes wrong, bear in mind he might be a little sleepy, right?
Yeah.
But he wasn't. He was totally on his game and he was so full of energy. But then at one point he's wearing this vest, almost like a jacket, and I noticed that his microphone was coming from the like built-in cord microphones, like an iPhone earbuds. And that's all well and good when you don't have a professional setup, right? Like I can work with that audio, especially over Zoom. But then it started rubbing against his jacket and doing the thing, and like having to interrupt Ron Howard during like this amazing talk about his rapport with Fonzie was just like, you have to do that like mental debate of like, do I salvage like the genuine emotion that's coming from this conversation and then wait till the end of it to say like, okay, cool, I need you to make sure that that microphone doesn't touch your jacket? Or do you interrupt him during that thing? And I ended up waiting there until the host goes, hey, is something weird with your mic? And I was like, oh, God, okay, I failed here, you know. But you learn, right? Like,
right.
You can always get them to retake something, but you can't always get them to retake like the inflection and the emotion that goes into it.
Right. Yeah. And the myth that like, the myth that you can fix it in post.
Oh, yeah.
Is... You know, I'm sure there's an Isotope plugin.
Sure.
Now made for that, like, like that noise. But
wish.
Like, I don't know what.
Yeah,
it is.
like if someone knows the secret modular chain, please leave it as a 5-star review in Leah's podcast because everyone needs to know. No gatekeeping of this Isotope knowledge, please.
No. Isotope is a thing that I've bought that I'm like, okay, I'm not there yet. I'm still in like, you know, freshman year, sophomore year. That's like a senior thesis sort of plug-in, and I'll
luckily, most of those things have. Oh God, this is the nerdiest thing in the world. You just search.
Be nerdy.
You just search spectral denoise, and then YouTube will be like, here's a million videos of a million different dudes trying to tell you their way for it, but usually the 2-minute video is the one that's like, here's basically how it works.
Yes. I'll tell you, I did that once. I don't remember like what the problem was I was having in with my editing. And the video I found was so helpful. And I was like, I recognize this voice from somewhere. Who's this guy? And I just am like going through my Rolodex and I'm like, he's not on any podcast I listen to. I'm like, who is he? He and I worked at the same restaurant in Durango, Colorado in 2001.
Wow.
He was the bartender. I was a waitress. And I was like, oh, if I think about him telling me to like go polish brass or carry this to table 27, now I remember who he is. It was the weirdest.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. There would be no way you could learn from that video. There's just
no.
I think you're just brought back to a part of your life that you're just like, I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
Restaurants are the worst in the terms of
Truly.
okay, that's a broad sweeping statement, but I would say like local restaurant politics are, I remember working at a restaurant called Habaneros in a suburb of Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And of course it was like the Mexican restaurant in middle America that all families went to because it had like a airplane on the roof, right? And it's like, wow, we got to try this place. They have an airplane. No. But there was a giant green paper. It was with a giant green pepper, like waving a hat out of the window. It is very inviting, right? I eat there every time I go to my hometown.
Amazing.
But it was my first job. I was a dishwasher there.
Uh-huh.
And boy, was that a reality check for me as a young man growing up in the suburbs. No one gave a shit about me,
No.
Especially as a 14, 15, 16-year-old. Worst I've ever been made fun of, but also like realizing like, oh yeah, no one gives a shit about me. Like actually getting over that hump of like being like, now I can be me, but not worry about necessarily this. And once I kind of like stepped out of like being like having my feelings hurt or whatever, like you actually just kind of start paying attention to how other people are treated. Novel thought, right?
Right.
But then
the golden rule.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Not just a saying.
But then also like what that means in terms of like drama you can observe. And holy crap, were so many people dating and not dating. And
Right.
the bartender hierarchy was different than like the server hierarchy.
Yes.
And oh my God. Now that is one of my favorite things. Just remembering that memory.
I just looked up habaneros in Lee's Summit.
Yes.
And it's got, you're not lying, it's got like one, Cocapelli's on the wall outside.
Yes.
Which
Buzz.
the Cocapelli from New Mexico to Kansas is obviously a strong migration. Very clear cultural connection there.
Yes.
And then there's truly like a 2-seater plane on the roof and a big windsock. What a funny place.
It was a big day in Lee's Summit when the drive-through of that restaurant opened up. Which also I know as a Doughboys fan, I'm sure you know the like hit or miss nature of an actual drive-through.
Yes.
In a restaurant, not a fast food or even fast casual, you know.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, that's rough.
Also, Lee's Summit, which was in the Missouri side of Kansas City, and I just remember to this day how much they desperately tried to teach us that it was not based off of Robert E. Lee. It was a different Lee. And just you could just tell that like it was wild. Like in retrospect, you know, growing up and learning, you know, opening up a real history book sort of situation.
Wait, was it?
There's no. I am strictly speculating here, but they went a little too hard in like who the town was definitely not named after.
Not named for.
Yeah, it's glad I'm not there anymore. How about that?
Yeah. I just interviewed a playwright from Kansas City and had a very long discussion about the difference between Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. So listeners are well equipped to understand this. That what it means that you're on the Missouri side.
Oh, and I went to college at KU too, so that's a whole even other thing on it.
Is that Manhattan or is that?
That's Lawrence.
It's
and
Lawrence.
So
okay.
K-State would be Manhattan.
Okay.
Wow, riveting. I know. I'm so sorry.
I've got a lot of friends who went to school in Lawrence.
It's a great town.
Yeah.
I would never live there again, but that's I think kind of the college rule, right? You either stay in the town or you leave and never move back.
Yes. I once had someone, so I'm from Indiana, and in Indiana on the license plates, the first 2 digits stand for your county.
Okay.
So I'm from Vigo County, which is County 84.
Okay.
And I remember dropping a friend off at a Greyhound in college. So this is late 90s. And this man looking at my car and looking at me and going, good place to be from, bad place to be going.
And you're like, hey, I actually know exactly what you mean, but you didn't have to say it.
You didn't need to say it out loud.
You didn't need
Weird
to
man
say
at
it.
a Greyhound station.
Oh, next time I'll ask you if I want your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't ask me to smile.
Well,
so
you got to take the little victories when you can,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do it.
Now that we've talked about more Kansas City geography and habaneros, oh, no, there was something else I wanted to say about it. What did I see?
Airplane, windsock, Cocapelli's.
Okay, yes. That it's a Piper Tomahawk.
Okay.
And I have this dream of, so when I was when I was like new on the internet, there were only 2 Leah Joneses on the internet.
The dream.
Me, the dream. I had my blog. I started blogging in 2003. And then there was this woman named Leah Jones, who has since passed, who was one of the original Piper Cub pilots and mechanics from like a certain area of Long Island.
Okay.
And she published a book of recollections before she passed away about like about what it was like to ferry Piper Cubs across the country during the war.
Okay.
And I always felt a little guilty for like knocking her out of the first spot on Google for our name, because I'm like, you were a groundbreaking woman pilot who did like all this important stuff. And I was like, and I am living in London for a few months.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and I just learned about you.
Yes. So I ordered that book from her like flying club. I sent them a paper check and got this little book of stories about her ferrying, how she got her pilot's license, and the bartering with her chemistry teacher to get out of chemistry so she could get more time in the like, she had the best story.
Yeah, now I think I know what your new podcast mini-series should be about.
Yes.
It's your version of like whatever hardcore history could be.
Yeah. So like I have like a weird sweet spot for Piper Cubs, although I think I would never fly in one.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I'm good.
I have enough trouble on Spirit that anything even below that is terrifying for me to think about. Especially like for one, I have no idea why, but for like the last week, I keep getting a repeat TikTok of a guy being like, "My pilot passed out. How do I land this plane?" I can't live with that. Yeah,
swipe.
Hold, not interested.
I don't want it from any viral TikTok. I don't want it reposted. I don't want your commentary on it.
Nope. It's almost worse than conspiracy theory talk.
Yeah.
Because I feel actually frightened and not angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Rob,
that's actually the true pronunciation.
Oh, good. I've been practicing all day. I'm in a hotel that doesn't have like a real coffee shop, so I had to get Dunkin' delivered, and I'm working on my second like iced latte.
Hell yeah.
Because I had to have 2 delivered to make it worth, and tip like a shit ton.
Yep.
To make it worth it, because it's next door to the convention center and it's a weekend, and despite this entire hotel being weddings, there's nowhere to get a cup of coffee.
Insane.
And so what is happening is the caffeine is kicking in as we're talking.
Hey, I'm here for it. I just had a Coke Zero Cherry, which is new to me. And the caffeine is hitting me differently than a standard Coke Zero, which I don't have much of that often anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a bias of current day effects, but like,
yes.
I'm feeling the zip and the buzz as well.
Awesome. So let's get into it. You told me your favorite. Now we've already talked a little bit about podcast producing.
Sure.
But your favorite type of podcast to produce is the recap show.
Yeah. Specifically because like it's finite in the sense that like if you want to stop the podcast, you know there's an ending.
Right.
But also like there's a lot of room to meander when you're recapping, especially something that's, over 10 years old.
Yeah.
But that's not always what I do. Anyway, I don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Well, so I'm curious, were you a fan of recap podcasts before you became a producer of recap podcasts?
No, actually. Most
Really?
of the podcasts I listened to before I really started getting into recap podcasts were like Gimlet shows and NPR type stuff. And then I stumbled on Doughboys as well. Mm-hmm. But that still came a little bit later because I got into like improv podcasts, the whole Earwolf slew of things,
Right.
and the Comedy Bang Bangs and the Improv for Humans and the yada yada shows I've since kind of like fallen off on, but like that introduced me kind of to the names of the people that I kind of started to follow careers of your Mitches, your Nick, that sort of stuff.
Right.
But the first recap podcast I worked on is a show called The Greatest Discovery, which was by the makers of The Greatest Generation, who recapped all of Star Trek The Next Generation, then, of course, Deep Space Nine, and now they're currently in Star Trek Voyager. And when I jumped on, it was because there was a new Star Trek show coming out, Star Trek Discovery at the time. It was like 2016, 2017. And I had known the hosts are Ben Harrison and Adam Pranica. And Ben Harrison I knew through Mike Sachs, who I hear is going to be a guest on your show or has already been a guest on your show. We'll find out.
Has already been a guest on the show.
And Ben was a fan of Mike, so we kind of, when I moved to New York and was a freelancer contract podcast producer, Ben reached out to me to actually help produce a different podcast called Friendly Fire, which was recapping old war movies.
Okay.
And so this is very convoluted, I know.
No, is this Ben from Blank Check?
No, it's different Ben. But
okay, all right. Same
still
city, different Ben.
Another great podcast, Blank Check. No, Ben is, Greatest Gen is on the Maximum Fun Network. Okay. So if anyone is a fan of, My Brother and Me, those sorts of shows, all that network. So we're working on this show called Friendly Fire, and, we're like, the whole goal here is we just want to bank like a year's worth of episodes, right? We're going to just try and get 50 episodes done so that when we actually roll out, we have time to adjust if need be. And we got about 10.
The goal was to bank 50 before publishing one.
Yeah, or if we got a good deal, if we were able to pitch to a network and they liked the ideas, we would at least have a handful of episodes so we wouldn't be just on it. But the whole idea was like, let's at least get, 40 or 50 done so that we can not stress and plan for release and just have a good time recording. That made it to about 15 episodes until the new Star Trek show was announced. And they were like, how would you also like to join our team to produce the recap show for Star Trek Discovery?
Okay.
And that is when I really started diving into what they were doing in Greatest Gen as a recap podcast, what other podcasts were doing for their recap podcasts, to kind of figure out how I wanted to make our show stand out, but also still be, an easy entry for people who like comedy and recap podcasts.
Right. I do think it's interesting that you're like recap. I like recap podcasts because there's an end in sight.
Yeah.
But then your entry point is Star Trek.
Yeah.
Which is an endless universe of spin-offs and takes and IP.
At this point, they have a very good job security on their end.
Yes.
I got to say, some of the best bosses I've ever had were Ben and Adam. They were like, the hardest thing in the world for me was leaving that team. Like, then their community of fans, like, they're called the Friends of DeSoto. I can only attribute a closer fan base would be like the Doughboys. Like, that just tight-knit, great online communities. Some outlier weirdness from time to time, but truly people love the podcast and want to talk about it,
Yeah. So for me, recap podcasts were my whole way into listening to podcasts. My podcast fandom origin story is West Wing Weekly.
Oh,
with
yes.
Josh Malina and Rishikesh.
Ah, yes.
Your way.
I deal with a lot of West Wing talk as well in Parks and Recollection. So
right, yeah. So for me, it started there, and then the Gilmore Girls reboot got announced.
Oh.
And I had heard of Gilmore Guys with Demi and Kevin T. Porter.
Yep.
So I started listening. I was like, I guess I should remember what the Gilmore Girls was about. And then from there, Gilmore Guys is how I found Jason Mantzoukas, who is my beloved Hollywood crush.
Sure.
And from there, that is like then all the podcasts I listen to kind of come from How Did This Get Made?
Yeah. Yeah. I totally feel you there. And it's so interesting to think about like West Wing Weekly brought you to Doughboys. You know,
Yeah.
like you go from this show that, and all right, a terrific show, terrific podcast, but to go from White House discussion, fictional White House discussion to Arby's, it's hard to find that through line, you know?
Yeah, I don't think that Rishi and Josh Malina imagined a world in which I would listen to them talk about the West Wing, and eventually get on a plane to go spend a weekend with Doughboys fans in Boston, right? Like, there's no way to understand how that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Straight from, oh my gosh.
I'm glad it did, but.
Yes, I am too. It was a very fun weekend, and so far I am COVID negative.
Hey,
Thank God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're all staying as secure as possible, everyone.
Yes.
Stay safe out there. It ain't over yet, okay?
It is not over yet. I'm double vaxxed, double boosted.
You got to.
Yeah.
Double mask. Hey, out here in LA, got to do it. Anyway, people know this. They're not dummies. They're not dummies. I trust your audience. But yeah, recap podcast in general, like, I wanted to, so I start, my first podcast ever was with Mike Sachs, and that was not a recap podcast. That was like funny found audio and sketches that we would put together, and then like really in-depth interviews with people. And I'm sure Mike will talk all about that, or has talked all about that. And so moving into like a different format, because like I had done all sorts of like contract work, like with Vice, where it was just like the worst experience of my life.
No.
Not that it was like terrible to work at per se. It was just like so many people like wanted to be too cool to have proper microphone technique. Like the amount of people I had to say like, can you actually talk into the mic? And he's like, nah, I'm good. I was like, no, that makes more work for me. Like, so I will, rather than doing that when I'm asking you, they don't want me as a full-time employee here. So that's the sort of episode they're going to get, you know, like I'm not going to put in the extra hours. And so I kind of was like, when Ben called me to start working on Greatest Discovery and Friendly Fire, like I put in my notice that day and I was like, I'm out of here. I want to like do something that I have, you know, that I'm excited about. You know, I had done financial podcasts for people in New York, and I had done like, you know, just these sort of things that great to be able to pay the bills, but like if I could pay the bills and enjoy myself, wow, what a concept, you know? And that has its own hang-ups as well, you know, like that's why I make a lot of my own independent shows, or I have over the days, you know. From working on Greatest Discovery, I used to do a podcast called The TV Show, which has gone its way. Things happen. You know, I want to go in a certain direction. The other host didn't want to go in that direction.
Yep.
I was stressed out because I'd been stuck in my house for 2 years. Just moved to LA, and it was just one of those things where, like, you go, hey, I'm frustrated. I got to get out of here. But in doing my own show with them, like, it really said, like, oh, there are no rules here. Yeah, I don't have to necessarily follow an entire series. Maybe this episode, I just want to watch an episode of Frasier. And it doesn't have to be in a sequential order. And the next episode's going to be when Mark goes goth on Home Improvement, you know? Also, side note, in doing that show, I learned something culturally impactful that I don't think a lot of people talk about. And I know John Gabris has brought this up a little bit if you've ever listened to High and Mighty. But
I listen to so much High and Mighty.
Yes.
I know I don't appear to be.
No, I just didn't want to assume.
Market,
I just didn't want to assume anything. But I figured.
Yes, I am a huge fan of Gabris.
Well, you know how when Gabris talks about Pacey frosting his tips in Dawson's Creek and how that changed, like, how he went and got his tips frosted. Hell, I went and got my tips frosted. You know, like, all of these, like, especially young men watching this, looking up to Pacey for probably all the wrong reasons. They went and get their tips frosted, but what I did is I watched the episode after that. And in the episode after Pacey gets his tips frosted, he reverts back to his regular hair, and he said, "It's crazy. I should never do something that, you know, a person I am not. I am more comfortable this way." And I was like, "You just got us all to frost our tips and then said we shouldn't?" But yeah, it's just the funny things like that really, you know, stick out to me. And then, you know, I've made so many recap podcasts, and I just released a trailer to the 4th season of my Vanderpump Rules recap podcast.
Amazing.
Called Vanderpump Robs.
It's so funny. Because you do, so you've got Parks and Recollection, which is Rob Lowe and Alan Yang.
Yes. Don't hold it against me.
With Rob Lowe.
Yes.
Who is the other Rob on Vanderpump Robs?
Just me.
Oh, there's a Rob on Vanderpump, right?
Well, okay.
I don't know why I know it's funny, but I don't know why.
The Rob on the Vanderpump Rules was a boyfriend of one of the cast members for one season. And there's a total montage of how much this character, Sheena, talks. And I say character, not cast member, because I am that invested in the show and know the ins and outs. That she... Like, by the end of that season of the show, they put together an entire montage of every time she said his name. And then I was like, well, I just have to have a podcast because this is a soundbite that can't just die on streaming now.
Right.
So that's a show where I just bring on another co-host or guest, and we just review an episode of Vanderpump Rules.
And is that one where you're going in order?
I am going in order, but I do not... allow myself to be beholden to any, like, must come out every week because it's just unrealistic since I don't make any money on it.
Right, yeah. It's so... Who was I talking to? I don't know. I don't know the difference between talking to and listening to a podcast anymore.
Sure. I know that poster, that meme poster.
Yeah. About doing seasons... Oh, it was on. It was the producer of Normal Gossip.
Okay.
Talking about why they do seasons, which is partly to give themselves better work-life balance and a better labor practice is to give yourself breaks.
Yeah, and
I was like, oh, that's such a good point.
And I like, I always kind of grimace a little bit when. And my friends, like people I know who make podcasts, do this. So this isn't like shade against them, but when they're like, "We've never missed a week," and it's like, yeah, but no one would mind if you did. You know, like it, like sticking to that is almost just. I could see that stressing someone out more than actually being beneficial to their work-life balance.
Yes.
But I bet it could be a slippery slope, too. Like, the first time you're like, hey, let's take off a Friday. It'll be like, hey, let's take off every Friday. You know? It worked once, but, yeah. I think it's incredibly healthy to not create rules for yourself that then you feel like you can't break, even though you etched them into the stone.
Yeah, I wrestle with that because for the first part of my marketing career, I was in social media, constantly explaining to clients, like, one audio file is not a podcast. That is just an audio file.
Yep.
if you're going to do a podcast, you have to commit to it. If you're going to do a blog, it's not one essay, it's regular content. If you're going to do Twitter, it's regular content. It's committing to the platform. And so that for me makes it hard to take time off. But I also, in the course of doing my podcast, was diagnosed with breast cancer and really had to learn. My last month of chemo, I had friends with their own podcasts step in and host Finding Favorites.
Sure.
So like take my format.
Sure.
And it was fun because they got to interview people that they wouldn't ever be guests on their own podcasts, but they got to borrow my format and then just put their audio on my feed. And
absolutely,
so it maintained the structure and gave me a much needed break.
So I'm glad you were able to like get that break and had like the community to be able to come in and like be like, yo, take some time off. We got this.
Yeah.
You know, it's always good to feel like that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think it's important. So that's why you do seasons of
Vanderpump
Robs.
Yep.
And for you, is a season of your podcast equivalent to a season of the TV show?
Correct.
Do you let that guide the seasons? Okay.
Yeah. I will just do there's usually about 12 episodes a season. And so that's a really, low lift in terms of most things. And then they do some reunions. I don't do the reunions as much because what you'll have noticed if any listeners go back and check it out is that like season 1 and season 2, pretty highly produced, right? Like I dedicated time to it. I had a lot more time during those seasons to work on stuff. Season 3, I wanted to change it up again because it's very hard to find unique and new guests that aren't just like your friends that you're kind of like rotating in and out. And I'm sure you face that as well.
Yes.
So I decided I had met this new friend in Los Angeles. Her name is Mackenzie Green. She is one of the funniest people I've ever followed on Instagram. Also very like, God, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but just very inspiring. How about that? Mm-hmm. She's a co-host to this woman named Taylor Strecker, who was an old SiriusXM personality, not as much anymore, now has a Patreon, and it's all like Bravo content and like celeb news, that sort of stuff. And Mackenzie had never seen an episode of Vanderpump Rules, but her host, like that she co-hosts with, is seen everything and is like friends with a couple of the cast members and like has lived within that world a little bit. And so it was kind of like a badge of honor for Mackenzie to be like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about when you put that on. And I was like, Mackenzie, I'll change format if for season 3 you guest host with me and we will just do 2 15-minute like old cartoons, right? Well, I'll watch an episode, you'll watch an episode, and then one episode of the podcast is my take on one, your take on the next, and we'll just bang through season 3. And it was excellent. I don't think I would go back to that format, but I've got a slightly different format for season 4, but it allows me the freedom by doing the seasons like that to then go, okay, that's what I did for season 3. I won't necessarily do that again, but I had fun doing that,
Yeah. So season 4 is coming up.
Yeah. They just renewed the TV show for season 10, so I waited for the TV show to announce its new season before I announced the trailer for my season.
Wow.
So that took a few months for me.
Vanderpump Robs.
Sure.
Your own project, your own independent project.
Yep.
And when you were on The Greatest Discovery, that was
Maximum Fun.
Max Fun.
Yep.
And then when Team Coco learns about you, Rob Schulte, and they bring you on and they're the ones that moved you out to LA?
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you move to LA where in COVID did you move to LA?
Right in the middle of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I lived with my partner and my dog.
Yep.
Hang on.
It's a cute dog.
Thank you.
I can see it.
Okay,
yep.
Great. And we lived in Brooklyn. And so, living the first 10 months or so under quarantine, especially in New York, was a lot. And
Yeah.
our neighborhood ended up being relatively COVID free. So, and there was space to walk in the park and stuff like that. But,
Yeah.
you know, it was kind of like opportunity called. And it's like, well, we're never going to have someone help us pay for a move across country unless her or
Yeah.
I get a new job. Right. So
Yep.
she had just gotten a new job that was fully remote. And I was like,
Okay.
they're offering me to come out here. She's like, let's go for it. But we just drove, we drove all of our stuff, and it was honestly one of the best times. But it was, I mean, I'm almost hitting my 1 year anniversary, and it still feels like I just moved to LA.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I have one of my best friends he was living in Chelsea during the first year of COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Total nightmare.
Yep.
And I tweeted one day, like, my neighbors were moving out, and I tweeted, who's looking for a 2-bedroom in Ravenswood, which is my neighborhood in Chicago. And he texted, and he was like, am I moving to Chicago? And he moved to Chicago, like, he signed a 2-year lease without ever seeing the apartment, and like, it was escape from New York.
Yeah. It's that a lot of people, same thing. And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, I applaud everyone who still was able to stay and like had found some sort of like meditation that they could do to do it. But I was crawling my tiny studio apartment walls, like,
Right.
And then moving out here, it's like, trust me, I'm not like flush with anything, but for the same amount, you get at least one more room.
Yes. Yeah, he was like, wait, my rent went down, and now I have a 2-bedroom apartment with like a kitchen and a dining room, and across the street from a huge park, and
insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, champagne problems, but like also, God, it's just you don't know. You don't know what you don't know in that scenario.
All right. So when you were working on The Greatest Discovery, that was for Max Fun, that was with friends, and you were just a producer, right?
Correct. And God, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, just a producer. I was never really on mic unless I was reading the credits.
And then you are recruited by Team Coco was like, we need that. We need another Rob. We got to get Rob. They finally read your PowerPoint.
Yes.
And then you start working for, I think one of the things that's interesting about Team Coco to me is how human all of the hosts seem, like Andy and Conan, and Nicole, but like, what was it like to go from recap podcasts that are either self-produced or you're producing for true fans of the show to the new format, which is like show alumni plus writer.
Yeah.
Which is of like where your guests and the people involved are like legit real world, not just podcast world, but real world celebrities.
People who have people. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, call my people,
Yeah.
Daunting, for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But like, it's like I used to work in live events and like at a dive bar or at like, bigger venues after that. So like once you kind of meet a musician who is polarizing or like really nice or, really like quiet or anything, you kind of realize, okay, that person's a human being. And it makes it a little bit easier for me to be like, so you still want those peanuts? I'll go get them for you,
Yeah.
The moment, like, Alan Yang, for instance, called me one day and was like, Schulte, what up? And I was like, what? What is going on here? Okay, cool. But like in a blip, I was like, okay, get out of it. This is now like your coworker. You're fine.
Yes.
But it is different because after the show started, Parks and Recollection, let's say, for example, there's a certain point in the run of the podcast, of the episodes that are out right now, where the format kind of changes. And that was because I got to know these people better. You know, I got to know the audience of the podcast better.
Right.
And like by being able to just like say we're all human beings here, we all have X type of humor or Y type of commentary we like to bring to the podcast.
Yeah.
It really helped build the show as like the relationships built behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it was good. It was a good feeling too, because I really like making that show.
It seems like you're going to have the cool, because you're basing, Parks and Rec, you've got a Mike Schur show, which has been the universe that I have enjoyed learning the most about through podcasting.
Yeah, it's wild. Like same for me. Like I was going back and listening to old interviews Mike Sachs did with some like writers of The Good Place and stuff. And it's like, wow, you guys were just about to make this show. And and that comes from this time in Parks, and that comes from this. And then now in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I can see the connections here. And it's crazy, especially between him and Greg Daniels, you know.
Right. Yeah, I just did an episode of it's called Tove. It is a Jewish podcast. It is a Jewish recap podcast about The Good Place.
Love it. I got to check this out.
And it's with Rabbi John Spira. I forget his full last name. So it's every week he has a different rabbi or Jewish educator on, and you recap the episode, and then you talk about like either a portion of the Torah or like Jewish, like what is the Jewish lesson that can be pulled from the episode.
I think that is a great concept for a podcast because so much, especially in recap shows, is just recapping the show. But it's about like what are you taking away from the show? You know what I mean? Like what is the show doing for you? And if you can find that umbrella like Tove, like it just feels like that's more than the sum of its parts, as silly as that sounds.
Yeah. So when, like I said, my origin story, West Wing Weekly.
Yes.
But then Gilmore Guys became Bunhead Bros, became the Maisel Goys.
Yes.
As they follow Amy Sherman Palladino.
Yes.
Does Parks and Recollection become another Mike Schur recap show, or is it going to wrap with the seasons it's going to wrap?
Now, that is something I don't know yet.
Yeah.
We're about to record the season finale of season 3 next week, Lil Sebastian. And we're all very excited about this. And there's been mumblings and murmurs about, where does this podcast go? Because people, every episode, it feels like I get double the inbox of questions that I got from the previous one, and double the voicemails coming in, and all of these things that it's a problem I've always wanted to have with a podcast that I've made independently. But then it's like you have to start thinking about like, okay, what's going to happen in 3 years or whatever, whenever the runway of Parks runs out. And I would love to just keep it going, like Parks and Recollection presents The Office, or something like that.
Yeah. And what is it? I'm curious what it's like, because with this one, you have more access. I can imagine that on the Star Trek one or on Vanderpump Robs, you might get like a connection to someone who worked on the show occasionally, or like that's aspirational.
Yeah.
What's it like when you're regularly having guests involved in the show? How does that change the chemistry of doing a recap podcast?
It's tough. Now, it's not the worst thing in the world, at all because you know you're going to get so much more. But for me as the producer, there's a few more notes that have to go into things in the back end because, let's face it, I'm not going to expect someone who worked on the show for many, many years to necessarily want to go back and listen to an episode of the podcast that they just may not. They'd be like, yeah, I was on the show. I know what the podcast is. But they may not know the format of the show. So, like, walking through something like that, whether verbally or on a Google Doc or whatever, is going to be hit or miss just for the sake of, like, if it's a Jim O'Hare, like, he's currently filming something, right? So he's making time to do this podcast, and I can ask for him to take a look at something, but it's not going to guarantee that he's going to look at it.
Sure.
Luckily, Jim was great. Awesome. Checked out all notes, and we had a great time.
Aww.
But then when you're also in the room doing the podcast or in the Zoom or in the whatever doing the podcast, it's so... We don't have a guest every single episode. So when we do, it's like, oh, shit, let's talk for 2 hours, and let's, like, throw the papers out of the, out. Like, this is a rare occurrence that we got Jerry on,
Yeah.
And
so do you guide the conversation and edit yourself out? Do you MC a little bit?
Only
and pull
when
yourself
it's like,
out?
only when it is truly necessary.
Okay.
Now, the good thing about Parks and Recollection is that one of my co-producers, since I'm like senior producer, engineer, yada, 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 go back 30 minutes, everyone. I talked all about that. One of the co-producers with me is Greg Levine, who started as a writer's assistant on the show and then became one of the writers towards like the second half of the series. And so Greg will be on mic, and we just welcome him with any input. Like, he's like, hey, guys, I just found a laptop full of all of our original scripts. So let's pull up what the dialogue was versus what actually made it to screen, And so he'll kind of like do that sort of guidance, but I'll only pop in for like the emergencies, or the like, or if they call on me to say something. But
like a tech emergency, or a Ron Howard doing this to his microphone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ron.
I don't want him ever to hear me using him as the example of a bad podcast.
Oh no, he was actually one of the best guests. The microphone was the culprit here.
Yes.
The headphone microphone. They get you every time.
That happened during a live stream. How did this get made?
Yep.
Where it got caught on, they didn't get StreamYard connected to June's correct microphone.
Yep.
It went to her headphone mic, and then that got caught on her earring.
Of course.
And started like getting pulled across her shirt. And it was, luckily,
the chat went crazy. I'm sure.
They've got such a good production team that and Paul has gotten so good at technology himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had a lot of empathy for them.
I am totally, I wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, fearing those moments. But no, to answer your question just a little bit further, I make essentially a run of show. Like, here's what I want you guys to talk about in the intro. Here are the episode details. Here's the blurb of the episode. Here's synopsis part 1. Here are Nope's notes. We recently changed it to the synopsis.
Oh my God. I love it.
We go pretty heavy into some of the terrible puns whenever we can.
You get to.
Yeah.
Leslie Knope gives you permission.
Exactly.
Begs you for puns and clever titles.
God, one day, my fingers are just crossed that we get Amy on the show. It's got to be a Dead Eyes situation, right? Like, we can't have Amy on until like the crux, true point where it needs to happen.
Yeah. Is there a dream? Okay. 2 scenarios.
All right.
One is your dream celebrity co-host recap podcast. What doesn't exist today? A show that you wish that you could co-host with a person who was on the show.
Okay, now I think this is going to be...
Or produce, if you don't want to put yourself on mic. But I want you on
I
mic.
will tell you this. This is one I desperately want to be on mic for. And
Okay.
shameless plug, I'm currently working on a new podcast that's going to be covering a whole bunch of genre-specific media.
Okay.
Look for Bill and Rob's An Excellent Adventure. But my nickname through Greatest Discovery is Rob's because my last name is Schulte, and they just thought it was funny to pluralize it. But it would be me co-hosting with... And it could be a rotation of the three main hosts, or the three main cast of this TV show. I don't care, but for purposes, we'll say who's top billed. Co-hosting with David Hasselhoff for Baywatch Nights, the short-lived Baywatch spinoff that only had 2 seasons.
Okay.
It's a detective. It's like Baywatch meets Columbo.
Okay.
Much worse than Columbo. And that's season 1. Season 2 goes full like supernatural X-Files-y. And I think being able to like talk about that show from concept to change to whatever, and knowing that it's only going to be like 50 episodes total,
right.
through line here, would just make for like one of the funnest things in the world. Because, hey, I'm on the internet. I also love Frasier. I think Frasier's a lot funnier than most people initially give it credit for. But I think Frasier's been done to death. You know, I think there's plenty of podcasts about it. Plenty of people are like, hey, here's a Frasier joke. But Baywatch Nights is still, oh, man. And I already tell you the title for it.
Okay.
And so, TM, everyone, this is public now. Night Owls.
I love it.
It's too terrible, but I have to do it.
Oh, my gosh.
You know?
Okay, so it was 95 to 97.
Yeah.
That is I'm like, when was this on that I've never heard of it?
And their detective agency is above a nightclub called Nights, so it always ends with them like shooting pool and listening to blues at this club. It's beautiful. It's a terrible show, and it is totally got the problems of 90s TV, but also like hilarious and terrible all at the same time. I would love to co-host that show with a Hasselhoff.
Amazing. This was on my freshman and sophomore years of college.
Ah, true. So you probably had bigger fish to fry.
I had bigger fish to fry, and also my freshman year is when Ross and Rachel finally kissed. So
Yep. That was, I believe, I was almost in college at that point. Friends, very important. And then I think after that was when I kind of stopped watching Friends. I was like, well, we got here. But
I was in an all-women's dorm, residence hall, and everybody was watching that night. And as you walk through the hallway, you could watch the whole episode just walking through the dorm.
I believe it, you know, because now I've gone back and watched more Friends, and like, I can totally understand why it's a comfort show to so many people. You know, it is. There's something about that show, warts and all, that like it resets. It's got a decent amount of jokes, and the relationships are believable. You know, and there's got to be tons of Friends podcasts out there too, though.
There must be.
They aren't rising to the top of our favorite comedians, though, I guess.
Well, I just think that Friends it's a comfort show. It's so popular to dunk on.
True.
That I think to hang your podcast wagon to like a 10-season run of an all-white show. Sure, yeah. Is like maybe not the moment to do that.
That's very astute. I totally agree. Now, XOXO Gossip Kings might be the smartest podcast to come out lately.
Is that Carl and...
Yeah, Carl's on it, and I forget the co-host right now, but I just heard Carl talking about it on The Juice, Solomon Giorgio's new podcast.
Carl Tart and Lamar Woods.
That's right, because they're both on... they both do Grand Crew, which I just finished the first season of.
Have you watched it?
Yes, I'm very...
so fun.
I'm very pleased with Grand Crew. Carl steals the show. I mean, everyone's great. Nicole's great, but
Nicole
like,
is so good.
I think between Carl and Nicole, if they don't get their own Grand Cru spinoff, I mean, I love everyone on the show. No shade, but like, I would watch just them and their own TV show as well.
Absolutely.
That's probably my podcast brain speaking, though, more than anything else.
Yeah, but it's just fun to watch. Like, I got into everything because of Jason Mantzoukas.
Sure.
Right? Like, but Nicole was a guest on How Did This Get Made?
Mm-hmm.
And Nailed It came out, and then I feel like Nailed It and Why Won't You Date Me sort of started around the same time.
Yeah, I think Why Won't You Date Me was a little bit before it, but like that's when Nicole Byer was a household name. So like all of her stuff just raised.
Yes.
You know?
And I am like embarrassingly fangirl for Nicole Byer.
Fair, understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a wonderful person, you know?
Yes.
Like, continues to put out amazing episodes and just being great.
She's so fun. She's I was at the show in Chicago where she broke the toilet.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. And is that the one where both Gavris and Mitch were like, no, we broke the toilet. We broke the toilet. Yep. How chivalrous of them.
Incredible chivalry. Oh my gosh. It was, and that's how I got into the Doughboys.
Okay. Perfect entry point. Mm-hmm. Perfect entry point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got into the, I guess I didn't say that. I got into the Doughboys because Friendly Fire wanted to do Doughboys-esque intros. So we always had and they're like, you should check this out. And I was like, how am I like 3 years behind on this podcast I love, you know?
Yes.
Oh. And then of course Doughboys got me into YKS, which is now also on one of my top tiers. Your Kickstarter sucks.
Your Kickstarter sucks. Yeah.
Not for everyone, but yeah. Anyway, I could talk that all day.
I don't listen to Your Kickstarter Sucks. I think I got into, it's just hard to, it was like Jason's Sugarfish episode was the first episode I listened to, and then seeing them on stage with Nicole.
Yep.
I went back and listened to all of their, like Mitch, Nick, and Gabris each had their like, her first 20 episodes were like friends she knew and guys she'd really dated and crushes from UBC, Upright Citizens, UCB.
Yeah.
And so I went back and I listened to their episodes, and then I started listening to High and Mighty and Doughboys.
Yep.
And now I'm basically like a recovering frat boy or something.
Yeah, I think we had a similar trajectory. Just some of the shows don't line up exactly, but they're all in the goulash,
Yeah.
They're all in the pot of hilarious podcasts.
And it gives me, and so like watching Nicole and Carl finally get their moments, and Mitch getting the Tomorrow War, just like, they're not my friends, but I feel so proud of these comedians that I know through my podcast listening, because they're all cross-contaminating each other's podcasts.
Yeah, no, and it's so...
The wrong word.
No, hey, I understand it, so it can't be that wrong. But it is one of those things where it's like, good for you all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you have successfully won me over. And if that TV show, whatever it is, whatever that movie is, whatever anything is, would have come out without the podcast, you probably wouldn't have had me there. Not because I wouldn't have liked it, but because it wouldn't have had that like ingrained, I know this person is fucking funny,
Yes.
Like,
yeah. I also really feel like they're a group that's, nobody is pulling the ladder up behind them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're pulling people up with them, and I really appreciate that.
And it's always something like, I'm always just so happy to learn that the few people I have met in this world are better than I expected. And I don't mean that in a low way, in a like a degrading sort of way. Sure. Like, oh, I had really low expectations. No, like, they've been nice people. I went to one of Paul F. Tompkins' shows, a few months back, and Carl was performing. Well, to be more specifically, Memphis, Kansas Breeze was performing.
Yes.
And Carl jumped in line only because he was about to go on stage and had to get his name checked off the list. And it was right in front of me and my girlfriend. And as I walked by, I was just like, hey, break a leg tonight. And he was like, oh, dude, thanks. Like, I really appreciate that. And then I had to engineer a session of the Juice podcast, like I was talking about, that Carl was a guest on. And I was like, hey, Carl, saw you at that show. And I just watched Grand Crew. And he was just like, holy shit, you're like, I never go into these things and people like have commented on this unless it's Doughboys or something. He was like, and then he was like, this is going to be a good episode. You know, I was like, hey, I wasn't even trying to blow smoke, but just knowing that these people are as genuine as they come off on an edited podcast is just great. And that's always, just to kind of bring it back, that's always what I want to do as a producer, right? Whether it's my shows that I'm independently producing or shows for Team Coco or shows that I've done for Max Fun or whatever, like I want it to ring true. I don't want there to be, you know, it could be a fictional show, but I don't want it to be forced. You know, I guess that's the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, that you don't want people's reaction to be when they come to a live show after you've been producing it, for people to walk away going like, wow, they're jerks. And like unedited, they're not nice people.
Yes. And I think we've all even on the podcasts that we enjoy, whether it be Doughboys or whatever, like we've all heard the guest that is either A, trying to do the jokes that usually fall on the hosts to do, or are trying to be too on or too...
Yeah.
Like, and here's a reference, and then like laughing and then just like repeating the other person's joke. You know what I mean? Like, and just saying it louder and in a new way. Like, I like to avoid that at all costs, which is, I think look, hey, my style could have been, you know, anything else. And other people may think that person X, Y, or Z is perfectly fine. And that's great. But like, since I do get to like produce and edit and mix, I can at least save that guest from being that guest, you know? Because most of the time, they're not trying to like one-up the host or do something like that. Or the host isn't trying to one-up the guest or something like that. I want everyone to be who I know them to be and like makes the best episode.
Yeah. I've done that before with... like I'll take out big tangents, or else a goal of mine is that I don't publish anything that could get anybody canceled.
Well, or even like, sure, great rule to have for one, but also like, how many times have we like been embarrassed when we think back to like a spelling bee or a talent show or something that is completely uneditable?
Right.
But mom's got the VHS tape or whatever it might be. And it's like, you know, if I would have just been able to do one more thing, this would have been a totally different non-traumatic childhood memory for me, you know? And I didn't do it on purpose. And I know that this person isn't necessarily doing it on purpose.
Yes.
So like, let's just present, if it serves the best episode, I think is the best way to put it, you know?
Yeah. But then sometimes not only is it on VHS, but the parents of the marching band made a tribute video to your most embarrassing moment. That's complete fiction. That never happened to me.
Good, because I am very happy that never actually happened, because that would be terrible, and I would be very sorry if that did happen to anyone.
It was brutal.
Oh my God.
I was a drum major, and I fell running across the field with a trophy.
No.
In full uniform.
No.
And the parents edited together a video of our marching band through the season, like as our show got better and better. And the finale moment was me running and falling 3 times. They put it on a loop.
No.
And it was not fun. Don't have talked to many therapists about it.
Well, here's what we're going to do. We're in an open moment. We've both shared. I'm going to share with you something that happened to me the first year I moved to New York, okay? And it's related to high school. So many years after.
Yes.
Sad news, my father had recently passed away, right? So occasionally, the next 6 months or whatever the cycle is where people are still thinking about these things, old family friends or neighbors or whatever will reach out on Facebook. Facebook, something I don't have anymore.
Mazel tov.
This is one of those reasons. Our next door neighbor, we lived in a cul-de-sac near Habaneros, as we all know. And this dad, we'll call him Dave.
Okay.
Dave was around my dad's age, so, another dad in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Had a daughter who was a grade higher than me, so, oftentimes we would have classes that crossed over one another. Dave messages me and be like, hey, we were thinking about you the other day, and my daughter retold the story about how slow you ran in gym class and how it was so hilarious that she had lapped you, and everyone was like, why is he running so slow? Isn't it so funny, the conversations that come back to you? And I just was like, that is so extremely rude. Why would you ever think that would be okay to message me? And then he got the block hammer, so I knew he'd at least read it before he couldn't comment back.
Yeah.
Parents,
why?
Back then, I mean, I'm sure parents have their problems now too, but like, your trophy story, it's like they didn't have to do that.
No.
He didn't have to write this message 13 years later on Facebook. What the and the reason for connecting too, like, so you're connecting with me because I had a parent that passed away, but you're also reminding me of how unathletic I was in high school? What?
Remember how funny and shameful it felt when my perfect daughter lapped you running the mile?
Yeah, like,
what the fuck?
you just want to know, like, what is the actual fucking thought process of these people sometimes? It's got to be lead poisoning or something.
Yeah, I think it is. That is the conspiracy I believe in.
Yep. And
yeah.
Gosh. We've gone all over the place today.
We
but
have.
I'm
It's
glad
been
we
wonderful.
recapped it all,
Yes. Rob, do you want people to follow you on the internet? Anything in particular? Oh my gosh. Did we talk about the audiobook?
Oh, let's talk about the
It's
audiobook.
the whole point of talking to you. Not the whole point,
But
that is why we connected.
Yeah, audiobook. Mike Sachs, he has been my like podcasting partner from when I started podcasting. I helped produce his show Doing It with Mike Sachs, which we're actually re-releasing all the old episodes now. We got the feedback. We did it. The first big thing we really did together, like on a professional level, was this show called Randy, which was a Stitcher Premium show about probably the worst person you knew in high school who accidentally came into a lot of money and is now still living in the hometown and president of his homeowners association. He's 36, but thinks he looks 22 when he wears a backwards baseball cap. Anyway,
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yes.
He just got his ankle bracelet removed.
Yes, exactly. Mitch was actually a cameo on that. Anyway, after we made that, we were like, oh, we really can kind of convert some of these books Mike writes into audio versions, but I've never actually done a straight audio book. And so the thing that Mike came out with most recently was, brace yourself, a January 6th comedy about a Dennis Miller type who has just failed up and up and up and up until the final chapter is January 6th. And let me tell you, as a content warning, like, it goes right up to the line of satire of like, some jokes are like, wow, but being written from a Dennis Miller type perspective, you at least
Right.
understand why the jokes are as shitty as they are, why it is. And like the humor comes from the uncomfortability of it.
Yes.
It's called Passing on the Right, like I said. And Mike is like, I'm not going to ask anyone else to read this fake character. So Mike Sachs reads as Skippy Batty Battison. And the hard part about this, besides like tough jokes or whatever, was spending the time to make it sound like listenable. Like it's not going to be painful to your ears, like technically speaking, but also done by a complete imbecile, you know, who's like recording from their computer mic or like fumbling around and like little sounds in the background, not in the studio, obviously.
Right.
And it took a while, but it is I'm just really happy we were able to work on it together because it had been a minute since Mike and I had been able to do a large project.
Yeah, it was when you described it in the dose chord, you were just like, you were so proud of it because it takes a skillful audio engineer to make something sound bad, but not comedically bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And not one that is going to annoy people that's comedically bad, but not unlistenable.
Yes, exactly. And at some points, who knows? But it was definitely one of those things where you think you're going to get it done a lot faster than you actually get it done. Because the actual amount of, like, there was a couple times where Mike actually forgot to do the right mic input. And so, like, how do I was like, this is still listenable. Now, how do I incorporate that into the book? Because I think it works, you know? So there's like one chapter where we have to like meander around that. And it's a lot of fun. So you can find that on Mike Sachs's website. And you can go to mikesachs.gumroad.com to directly get the download. But in terms of me, you can find me. I am on Twitter and Instagram, but I think most notably, people can just follow my Twitch page, which is twitch.tv/ROBS. Robs. I also watch Yusong stream a lot of times when he's on, so I'll join in the chat there. Yusong has no idea who I am, but, you know, maybe your listeners will now.
Right.
We can all hang out and play some Mario together or something.
Great. Well, Rob, thank you so much for taking your Saturday afternoon to join me on Finding Favorites.
Yeah, I had a blast. Like, I looked down at the clock and I was like, holy crap, we've been talking.
Yeah. I do have to, I'm like, I have to be at a wedding in an hour, so I might want to take a shower. I might not. I haven't decided yet.
It's Saturday, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.